Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, Senior Editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the Safe Camp Audio Network. You can check out our show page and all of Safe Camp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or at Safe Camp Audio on social media. So on today's episode, we are talking to Kamilah Bunn, CEO of the National Adoption Association, and Toni Oliver, former president of the National Association of Black Social Workers. We're going to talk about the recently published Black Paper, which is an early look at the effect of the National Adoption Association's Ujima Black Family Program. And the mission there is to address long-standing disparities in child welfare and push back against the stereotype that Black families do not adopt. You'll hear about Ujima and its aims, what the Black Paper shows has happened thus far with the project, and much more, including Toni Oliver's tips for tuning out the news when it gets too overwhelmingly depressing. You don't want to miss that. So without further ado, here is our interview with Kamilah Bunn and Toni Oliver. All right, we are joined today by Kamilah Bunn, CEO of the National Adoption Association, and Toni Oliver, former president of the National Association of Black Social Workers and one of NAA's Ujima Leadership Council members. We're going to talk about the recent Black Paper put out by the association as an interim report of sorts on the organization's Ujima Black Family Program, which is part of the association's effort to address longstanding disparities in child welfare and to push back against the stereotype that Black families do not adopt. So Kamilah and Toni, thanks for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How long have you guys known each other and worked together?
So I'm going to say at least 20 years. I came to DC on a contract with the public department to manage the adoption services in 1998. And at the time, the DC department was in receivership because children were not being adopted as the receivers felt they should be. And they were, I don't want to say stockpiling, but they were just gathering in the system with no seemingly option for permanency. And so I came to manage that program. And Kamilah was also at that point finishing her master's and working with an agency for diligent recruitment. So one of the things I did when I got to DC was to look at who's doing recruitment in DC. And she was one of the projects. And we worked together at that point and worked together extremely well. And I was only there for 2 years. And then I came back. At the time, I also had a Black adoption agency here in Atlanta called Roots. And I came back to do that full time. Fast forward 20 years, Kamilah is now CEO of the National Adoption Association, looking at ways to enable the members of that organization to get a broader perspective of what are the issues related to recruitment of Black families for Black children and children who do not move out of the system the way that they should be. And she picked up the phone and called me. We hadn't talked for 20 years and asked me if I would be willing to do a webinar for the membership. We talked about what her intention was for that. And I said, sure. Yeah, I think I can do that. And so I did that one webinar. And from that point on, for the past, we're going on 3 years now, she has pulled me into various projects that she's working on in different states around the same issue.
Very cool. Kamilah, anything to add to that? Was that all facts? Did she cover it?
That's facts for sure. That's Mama Toni. Mama Toni has been someone that I've always looked up to as a mentor and a second motherly figure. In the African and Afrocentric community, we call elders mama. We call elders who identify as women mama, elders who identify as men baba. And so Mama Toni has always been that to me. Her agency, she's far too humble, Roots Adoption Agency, for many of us who are working in diligent recruitment, who care about Black family connections, It's sort of like the pinnacle that we look to for understanding, for learning how to really do this work effectively. When I was working on a federal grant and our paths crossed, I was working on a federal grant called Project If Not Us, and it was meant to demonstrate that we could identify families in the Black community who would adopt Black boys. And so I learned a great deal from Mama Toni and her work in Atlanta that I was able to replicate in the DC DMV area to identify more than 1,000 people who step forward to care for our young brothers. And so I say that to say, as my grandma would say, and what's in the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun. So if we put people in connection with one another, peer to peer, learning groups, we can learn a great deal from one another, and we can replicate good practice because there's good practice happening everywhere.
Yeah,
and
which is sort of the origin of your organization that you lead now. Is kind of the same concept, right? I mean, that's how the three women that started. I always forget the history. Was it AEA that became the association? They just changed the name at some point.
Yes, we changed our name 3 years ago. We were founded by 3 women, girl power, who came together across, a table, so to speak, figurative table, I should say, to learn from one another. They were in different states and they were trying to share best practices. At the time in the 80s, a crack cocaine epidemic was happening. There were quote unquote border babies. There were, mothers who were in neighborhoods that were being surveilled. There was crack cocaine being pumped into neighborhoods. There's some systemic issues that we know now of why we saw those outcomes at that time. And our agency, that's really the origin of our agency. We started because people were asking the why. And as a organization that was built at that time, we've always been asking the why, the deeper questions, below the surface, below the iceberg, not just taking whatever is happening at the surface level, really trying to delve into those questions. And so looking at how we can change systems, how we can change organizations. So at the time, we started out at 3. And then we grew. Now we're at 500 additional members across the country.
That's great.
And we're really proud of that growth. And we just want to continue to support people to think deeper about the work and about the outcomes that we see.
And before we get into more about that work, it occurs to me, we got into the kind of your guys' story together, but not getting these folks to know a little bit more personal, something about each of you, which is like our standard here at the podcast. So why don't you both give me at least one favorite in these categories: movie or TV show, book, musical group, or sports team? You can give me any of those or all of them. Kamilah, I'll put you on the spot to start first. What do you got?
Oh, gosh. All right. I'll go first. I love Kamasi Washington. He's a jazz artist. Love him. I also love, so I'm from New Jersey originally. All right. So I got to say, go Knicks, because we definitely supported the Knicks. And I was so excited and yelling at my TV screen every night with my husband when we were so close to making it through, the championship. You should have saw us. It was like, my daughter was like, be quiet down there. I'm trying to sleep.
No Nets. You're not old enough to have preceded the Nets. So you just said, forget the Nets. I'm going Knicks.
Yeah. I mean, the Nets were there, but I grew up in North Jersey. So we always looked to the Knicks. I'm a John Starks girl. I had a John Starks, poster above my bed of him dunking on
Jordan. Absolutely.
Yes. Yep. It was in my bedroom growing up. So there I am.
It's got to be one of the 5 most iconic things that ever happened in NBA basketball. It's amazing. Toni, what do you got for the folks? Movie, TV show, book, musical group, or sports team?
Well, this is actually one of my favorite times. I love the Olympics. So I've been looking at the trials. I'm getting ready for the Olympics. It's really, I'm glued to the TV. And I really don't know the track stars. I know some of them. I love track and field. I love the events, even like wrestling, that I don't know that much about. And the new ones that come out that somebody decided that this should be, And I'm like, why? When did that become a sport? But it's just fascinating. And I'm glued. What is it? Is it 2 weeks, 3 weeks to the TV?
Something
I
like that,
can't
yeah. Something
move
like that.
myself away from it. And not only that, in preparation, I'm finding myself when I'm on Facebook and they have these little clips of different Olympic activities, track meets and gymnastics and swimming. I'm clicking on them. I'm obsessed. But the other thing I thought about before that, and I thought about Olympics because Kamilah began to talk about her sports addiction. Interestingly enough, things are just so heavy in the world right now. I have the TV on in my house pretty much all day for noise. I'm not watching it, it's just on. But I will hear something that disturbs me and I immediately turn to the game show network. So if there's an old game or a new game that I thought was ridiculous in the past, I know the game, I know the host, I know the rules, even when I look at it and they're new games that I'm like, who would play this? Who came up with this? Within a month, I know it and I'm answering and I'm hollering at the TV, telling people what the answers are. So I guess that, that's the yin and yang of two of the things that I enjoy.
My fallback, if I just can't think of anything and I don't want to watch the news for the exact reasons you just said, is Family Feud. Family Feud is just, just never fails, especially the Steve Harvey ones. He's just
Steve
so
Harvey,
good at
Family Feud. Yep.
Yeah. Some of the older ones are a little, the first guy was pretty creepy. The rest of the hosts have been good. Steve Harvey's the GOAT, though.
Yeah. My daughter and I imitate him because he says the same thing. When he comes out, it's like he doesn't switch up. And then he says I pretty much know what family who loses, he'll say, y'all are a really good family. You played the game really well. Y'all look real good on TV.
I can't wait till the next time I see that, and that confirms it. I can't wait.
Yep. It's a losing family. He'll say that.
All right, so I want to talk about what exactly the Ujima Black Family Program is. But before that, let's go back to as I was describing it, because we kind of wrote a little bit about it as you launched with some support. I think wrote from Walmart and a couple other foundations. Like this concept of, I think that most listeners of this podcast are pretty aware of the existence of disparities in the child welfare system. I think less so probably people have grappled with or thought about this idea of a stereotype that Black families do not adopt. So maybe either one of you or both can speak to sort of like what you see to be the sort of the root or causal factors of that, because I don't think that's discussed nearly as much as just like broader disparities on the kids coming in as opposed to the caregivers, right?
Yeah. It's not discussed, but it goes back to the beginning of, let's say, the New Deal in the 30s, when the United States was first looking at how do we set up all of these entitlement programs. I think what Roosevelt, they called his programs alphabet soup because there were so many of them. And they did not apply to Black families. And in fact, aid to dependent children was intended for white families, many of whom had husbands who had gone to war, so that they would not have to go to work. They would receive financial assistance and they would be able to keep their families together. So you fast forward over time, when you begin to see Black families get entitlements to some of these programs, the aid to dependent children becomes aid to families with dependent children, AFDC. And the requirements for that money became very different. There were work requirements, there were investigation requirements. Women should not have a man in the home. I mean, everything began to change when the eligibility broadened from white families to Black families. And the thinking was that Black people cannot care for their children. So, I mean, even if we look at today, if we take our cue from media, what we see portrayed of Black people is generally criminality. It is the inability to measure up to standards that we expect or American standards. And we still believe through programs like Child Abuse and Treatment Act that was enacted in 1974, that somebody must go into these communities and look at how people are caring for their children. And if they do not meet certain standards, then their children should be removed. Interestingly, I mean, we see disproportionality in all of that because The belief system is that, if you're looking for something, you find it. So if I go in and I look at something and I see dysfunction, you go in and you see strength. The system is built on dysfunction, and the system is also built on, we will find this in poor communities. So that's how Black children begin to come in. Not only do they come in disproportionately, but when they come in, they are served differently, they stay longer, they experience multiple moves, and the likelihood of them exiting into a permanent family is very, very low. So you take somebody like Kamilah, you take somebody like me when I had roots who did not believe that that was the case. And people used to say to me when I had an agency, how do you find these families? I mean, you're placing Black kids who are older, they're in large sibling groups, they have special needs, and they're Black families who are adopting. Where are you finding them? And my question was, why aren't you finding them? Because they've been there all along. But it's the perception of strengths. And if we continue to see that, and so it's unsettling to me that when I started Roots in the early 90s, the question was asked and the belief system was in place that Black families don't adopt and Black children are hard to place. We fast forward to 2024. The belief system is Black families don't adopt and Black children are hard to place. And so it takes a special effort. And when we begin to kind of pull back the layers of the onion to figure out how can we change this, then you have programs that Kamilah has set up in her vision that surround or is supported by the Black paper, that we believe there are people in the workforce who want to do different, but they do not have the tools, nor do they have the encouragement in their agencies to operate differently.
Kamilah, does the association draw any distinction between adopters versus, say, a kinship or a fictive kinship caregiver in this sense? If there is this stereotype out there that Black families are not willing to adopt or don't want to adopt, do you feel like that's also true about a willingness to step up in situations where relatives are involved? Or is there a difference, in how you guys come at this?
No, I think we see it one and the same. It comes down to how people were socialized, like Mama Toni said. And by the way, what Mama Toni how she just schooled us just now on the history, right? That's what Ujima is really about. And Mama Toni is one of many of our leadership council members, of scholars and elders who are teaching our leaders our history and how the outcomes that we see are tied to what happened and how the system was designed to act. So if people are socialized with the belief that there aren't strengths within Black communities need to be surveilled, Black communities are unable to care for their children, Black communities, all these different stereotypes that are associated with Black communities that people are socialized around, then why would you, quote unquote, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Why would you look at kin? Why would you look at that community to, quote unquote, recruit from? And that's the type of mentality that we are trying to disrupt through Ujima. And we have leaders that are associated with Ujima who believe as we believe and have said enough is enough. We want to disrupt this mentality, this mental model that we all have been socialized around that says Black families don't adopt, when really we know we need and youth deserve connections to their family of origin.
I could not have segued that better. So let's go from what you just described to letting folks know a little bit about how Ujima works. I think the three key things I definitely want people to come away from is understanding who is participating in this program. Take us through sort of the life cycle in that program. Like, what are they going to get out of it? Is it, how long will they be involved and all that? And then how you plan to measure whether this has worked or not. I think the Black paper is sort of an intermediary. Check in on it, and we'll talk about that separately. But in the long term, how will you know if it's worked or had an impact that you want?
Thank you for that. The impetus, what really made us create Ujima, it came out of the murder of George Floyd, when many of us who were awoke, so to speak, awake, really became more aware. I think it was documented for all to see the disparities. And I think we all kind of sat with it and started to ask the question, what am I doing with my day today that is impacting, or what am I not doing that could impact the outcomes that we see, right? We all started to look at our own work. And I looked within myself to say, what am I doing as a leader of a child welfare organization to really disrupt the system that causes an unarmed Black man to be killed in broad daylight by a police officer with many people observing this, essentially this lynching? What am I doing? And so that's when we called in Mama Toni. We had lots of conversations. And what ended up happening is our members across the country were really eager to learn more about the historical context and how it relates to the outcomes that they see. What are my everyday decisions that I'm making? How is that impacting poverty? How is that impacting family connections, disruptions, adoptions, all of this? What am I doing in my day-to-day that is impacting the outcomes that we see? And so they kept being hungry for more and asking us to offer more services. We even went out to some sites and started to do some more tailored technical assistance as well. Ujima came about when a few of our members came together and said to me, because I have an open door policy, we really would like more time, more in-depth, more intensive time with Mama Toni, more intensive time with Mama Joyce James. These are members and people, leaders in the racial equity movement. So we really co-created with those that they wanted to learn from, with our elders, what we need right now in order to universally or collectively broaden and increase the consciousness of leaders in child welfare. And it was a little bit controversial, John, because we were talking about Black leaders, right? So I had to go to my board and say, we're not being exclusionary, but we know that there are some things that we need to talk about with our kinfolk in a way, as Mama Toni always says, shorthand, that we understand and get. And there's also some agency that we want to have over the way this is done that we need to do within ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people were having these conversations about affinity groups and ERBs and all that. So at the time when I came to the board with this idea, they were like, go for it and make it happen. And so we co-created really the purpose behind Ujima being to transform the mindset and deepen the consciousness of professionals working in or with child welfare, focusing on the importance of maintaining Black family connections. That's ultimately our North Star. What we want to see is a deepening of consciousness. And you're right, you said earlier, Dr. Jessica Price, the esteemed Dr. Jessica Price, is helping us to measure how we are transforming the mindset and deepening the consciousness of professionals working in or with foster care systems, people who touch it. And John, you asked who can be involved. So we were really intentional about who we invited, because we invited people into this circle. So we looked across the country. We did a national scan, who's out there. We looked at our membership. We looked at individuals who are leading child welfare systems. But we didn't want to just do child welfare. Often we just have this individual system and we kind of work it out, right? Versus not looking at what other system failed the family that causes separation to occur, like mental health systems or the justice system. So we wanted to, with Ujima, we work with our leadership council to say, who else do we need to have involved? So we did bring in folks who come with the lens of the justice system, folks who come from the clinical side, folks who are working directly in child welfare, folks who are involved or touching the child welfare system, who want to know more about how to maintain Black family connections by thinking about their everyday decisions and how they can too begin to transform their mindset and deepen their consciousness around these issues.
Was it sort of an invite situation? Did you cultivate a list, or did you kind of put an open call out for people that might want to seek this opportunity?
We did both. So we tapped the shoulder of many leaders. We developed a criteria with our leadership council of scholars and elders, Mama Toni, Mama Joyce, folks from historically Black colleges and universities who had their contacts. So we developed a list. We tapped the shoulder of some folks. And then we also had an open form that people could use to submit an application. So we did both. We reviewed both. In the end, we ended up with about 50 leaders. And then through that process, we had a prerequisite training that the leaders had to go through. And we had a couple of people go through that and say, now is not the time for me to take this on. And so our list began to dwindle down a bit to 42. And that's where we landed over the course of the year.
Before I was adopted, I felt like my life was already over.
My biggest fear was that I would age out and not know how to be sufficient on my own.
At a certain age, like they don't want you, you're troubled and stuff.
The clock is ticking for the more than 125,000 kids waiting to be adopted from foster care. Help the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption prevent them from aging out without a permanent family. Learn more at davethomasfoundation.org.
Okay, so these are 42 people that have day jobs for sure. Describe to people like how they interact with Ujima and like how you guys deliver the kind of program.
Sure. So we have a number of interventions that we offer within the Ujima program. Again, it's all around consciousness building, peer networks, the things that, kind of are a cornerstone of our organization. And so we have regular meetings that are virtual with our leadership, our Ujima leaders, to come together to learn about different issues in the Black community and how they relate to Black family connections. We have office hours with our Ujima Leadership Council members, like Mama Toni. Tomorrow, one of our Ujima Leadership Council members, Sixto Cancel, is doing office hours as well. He runs an organization called Think of Us. I'm sure you're familiar with their work. So he's having an office hour as well with our leaders to talk about lived experience and how to incorporate that in. We've had our groundwater analysis training by Mama Joyce James, who really focuses on, again, that systemic issue and focusing on your institution. We've done things on wellness as well. And that's a big part of the Black paper, is that while people have day jobs, as you said, John, and they're taking on change projects, it feels like it's a double burden, for these leaders to take that on and their day job and their life. So we want to have some opportunities for wellness to be prioritized, for leaders to know that they're not alone. We put people in the breakout rooms, they connect to keep each other accountable on our change projects, and they share best practices with one another about how they're changing their system. One of the change projects, I'll give you an example, John, of one of our change projects. So in the state of New York, we have one of our leaders who's championing a change project around providing small cash assistance transfers to 50 families. They're doing a pilot to 50 families that were not court involved, but had a investigation. And the system, decided that they did not need to be court involved, but they still are being reviewed by a caseworker. And so we're trying to really divert and deflect those children from experiencing family separation. And we know that basic needs for those 50 families is an issue that was noted in their case plan. And so the leader installed this program, first ever program, and it's been operating now for 10 months. So, and that's in addition to their regular work. We have a leadership council, or an Ujima leader in Maryland, the state of Maryland, who is starting a kinship center that, again, is looking at diverting and deflecting families from ever coming to the attention of child welfare by providing kin support specifically for relatives who might need a drop-in service, might need back to school supplies. It could be anything. They need to drop into a place in the community. So they want it to be located there so that people can drop in and receive support. We have everything from those kind of issues along with the more broader policy changes as well. So we have a leader right now who's working on replicating ICWA, a policy like ICWA for child welfare. And what does that look like, in terms of the U.S. child welfare system? If we had a similar program as ICWA for Black families, how would that impact things? So that's a big goal, right?
If they're based in Minnesota, they might have already got that done, right? Is that who we're talking about?
There's something like that, but there's also like, how do we get that movement going? And so I bring up those examples to show that there are a number of different policy and practice changes that And some are on a smaller scale and more tactical, like the cash transfers. Some are, drop-in centers, physical spaces like the kinship center, and some are major policy changes. And our role with all of this is to just pour into them as much as we can, let them know that they are part of a community and that we care about them, but we care about them individually, each of them individually. We want them to be successful. And we also want them to deepen their consciousness around what are the things that they're doing in their everyday decisions that are impacting the outcomes we see.
Some programs, it's obvious what you'd look for and say, like, is this a success? Some things are more nebulous. You're investing in the experience and knowledge of leaders. That's inherently, you don't know where they're going to go with their careers, right? But as you mentioned, you're having Dr. Price evaluate it. How are you having her evaluate it? How is she, I'm sure she came up with part of this. So like, how does she see measuring something like this going? What will she look at? And on what time frame?
Yeah, so we're doing a couple of measurements for the Ujima program. And, Dr. Price is a pretty brilliant person. She designed an evaluation is looking at 5 different measures. So she's looking at leadership support, leadership readiness, leadership mindset, self-efficacy, and wellness. And what the Black paper showed is that on all of these domains, with the exception of one, we see some movement in the right direction. However, when it comes to wellness, we see there being significant depreciation. So it was no surprise when she shared these findings back with us after a year of Ujima, when we shared it with the Leadership Council. No real surprise to the Leadership Council, I would say, that we're seeing a depreciation when it comes to leadership wellness and as fortitude and mindset is growing, right? Because when you start to, as Mama Toni said earlier, when you start to see things differently, you start to realize your decision is impacting generations, right? And then you start to maybe have a moment, should I retreat or should I continue? And I'm carrying this burden along with my everyday, day-to-day job. And I have no support within the organization. I feel like I'm coming up against a lot of resistance. And so those are some of the measures that she's looking at for us. And along the way, we've learned a great deal about how best to manage the wellness piece from Dr. Price. But those are some of the measures that we're looking at.
Toni, you're kind of engaging one-on-one and in groups with these leaders. How does it make you feel to see that they're, through the experience of this program, worse is not the word, but like they're feeling worse in some ways as they go through it?
So I can identify with it because I'm retired now, but working in the field and having an awareness of what's happening to families and comparing that to what the mission of the organization says they're there for is a very hard place to be. And so they have chosen to be in this program, and in this program, they have chosen to look at something that I would say weighs heavy on their hearts. And they're saying it could be very different. Can I figure out a way that I can change the experience of families and children so that they achieve positive outcomes and not harm? And so the hurt is, for how many years I've been in the system following policies and procedures that produce harm. The things that they have decided to do are creating positive outcomes. But I don't want to say, well, I will say, to me, you're in a war. So it's the war within. You're in a system that believes that we're doing all we can do for these children and families. But you believe that what is being done is causing harm, and it's not all that you can do for them in a positive light. So to be able to engage them in an opportunity to be able to have a support group, so to speak, where there are other people in other systems who are trying to do the same thing, who are going home weighted down because the support, I'm thinking that the support that they get for the new things that they're doing is not in the system, but it's in themselves and it's with the program.
Now, I'd
So,
imagine some of these leaders have voiced this directly to you. I mean, you're talking about sort of their feedback for the evaluation, but I'm sure in your conversation, some of them have said, Toni, this is really weighing heavy. What advice are you giving them? How are you
well,
advising
there's
them on that?
another staff person that facilitates discussions with them, and she says to them that the discussions that they have is a safe place where they can talk.
Mhm.
So a lot of what they discuss that is a part of this program, I don't even know as a facilitator of groups. I can guess because I've had similar experiences, because even through working with NAA, I've been able to do focus groups with birth parents, with youth in care, with people who are considering adoption, with administrators, with supervisors, and the frustration that they carry when they have an opportunity to say what's wrong. That's not a discussion that is welcomed in the workplace. And addressing what's wrong, really, there's no systematic way in the workplace to begin to identify what's wrong and to work to make it better. So now here I am, and I have bared my soul and maybe even said things that I didn't realize I was carrying. So now that I do, what do I do with it? I think the wonderful thing for these leaders is that they are supported through Ujima to be able to create programs to do better for what they see is at least one problem within their system. One of the things that I saw in terms of what one of the leaders was doing was she decided that most of what I've read seems they're focused on how do we get these kids out of foster care? What do their families need in order to be able to pass the test with this agency to say I'm good enough to take care of my own kids, whether they're fictive kin or kinship or birth families, so that they see that there are children in the foster care system who could be served differently and not be in the foster care system. So one of the things that I saw was this woman who's giving small stipends to families so that they have an additional financial means to meet the needs of their children because their children came into care because it was determined by someone that they were neglecting their children's basic needs. That's very much like the child tax credit and the other money that was given during the pandemic to families. And people were saying, "Oh, that's a little bit of money. I mean, what is a family going to do with that?" What did families do with that? It took thousands of families out of poverty. Some families were able, because they had the ability to not go to work and to have money to care for their kids, to set up their own businesses. They had things that, ideas of things that they would like to do to feel better about themselves, and they did it. So it doesn't take a lot, but when you're bringing children into care because the families cannot manage to meet the basic needs of children, which is countrywide. I was going to say it's worldwide, probably, but throughout the United States, that's the case. But for poor families in certain zip codes, because they can't do what most other families are struggling to do, their children get removed. And many times in other focus groups, during the focus group, the workers have been able to get these ahas, like some of the, or many, if not all, of the leaders in the Ujima program. I'm seeing that the outcomes for white children are different than the outcomes for Black children for the same thing. Why is that? And when they get this aha, it's like, oh, maybe this is just one case that I happen to see. And then they're saying, no, this is systemic. And I didn't even I accepted it before because this is what the culture supports. Mm-hmm. This is what the culture believes. And so I come in and I begin to do my job. And when I do my job based on what the agency says we should do, the discrepancies by race are glaring.
And it's like the double consciousness that we talk about in the Black paper. So like Mama Toni said, you're representing the system, and you're also a part of the families that are disproportionately
involved in the system.
In the system, yes, and are experiencing disparate treatment, and are having these separations occur at a disproportionate rate. And so how do you come to terms with that double consciousness? Because like Mama Toni said, you're doing your quote unquote job, but your job that you're being rewarded for doing right, with your employer is causing harm to the people that you want to serve and support and disentangle from the system. And so that creates moral injury, that creates depreciation of wellness and well-being. And it's also the learning edge that we're hoping leaders get to. It's like that aha moment, like Mama Toni said, that you're like, wait a minute, I've been taught wrong. I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm focusing in the wrong area. I need to focus my attention here. These systems need to transform, and these people are within systems, most of them. And so part of the reason why we wanted to create this program is because as there's lots of chatter happening right now about the system, there are people within it that are working within it that want to see it transform and do different things, right? And they deserve to also be supported in that movement.
Name of the report is The Black Paper. It is available at the National Adoption Association's website, and I will post it in the show notes along with our coverage of the program when it started. I'll also throw in a link to Toni's op-ed that she penned for us on a similar issue, just in case you want to go back and read that. But Kamilah Bunn and Toni Oliver, thank you so much for joining us on the Imprint Weekly podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks to Kamilah Bunn and Toni Oliver for joining us today. The Imprint Weekly podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or at Safe Camp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Onjoko with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you'd consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you'd consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it's very easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. And you can always get us over email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and I'll see you next week.